The red giant star loomed like a wound in the dark fabric of space, its feeble light casting an eerie glow across the decaying world of Atrelia. Beneath its oppressive glare, thick clouds streaked with rust and ash drifted sluggishly, choking the sky and bathing the crumbling surface in hues of burnt copper. Jagged remnants of alien spires pierced the cracked ground, monuments to a civilization that had fallen into dust and memory. The air, thick with toxins, clung to every breath. Captain Alan Morgan stood at the viewport of his ship, the Solace, watching the planet's final moments with a grim expression. The distress signal that had led him here was barely a whisper in the vast emptiness of space, but Alan had learned long ago that even faint cries deserved to be answered. Every call was a story waiting to be uncovered, and Atrelia was no different, though its tale seemed on the verge of a tragic ending. Alan adjusted the seal on his oxygen filter before descending the boarding ramp. The heat struck him first, radiating up from the fractured earth like a furnace. His boots left deep prints in the brittle soil. He scanned the desolation, fingers instinctively brushing the grip of the blaster at his hip. Ruins like this often held more than just forgotten echoes of the past. Solace, keep monitoring for any movement, Alan said into his comm, his voice low. Acknowledged, Captain. Energy readings remain faint and chaotic. Atmospheric toxicity at hazardous levels recommend limiting exposure to 2 hours, came the reply, Solace's AI speaking with a crisp, efficient cadence. Copy that. Alan moved cautiously, his eyes scanning for any hint of what had brought this world to ruin. The remains of statues, tall, graceful figures with elongated limbs and intricate features, lay scattered across what might once have been a plaza. Now, they were silent sentinels, toppled and broken. Alan's chest tightened. Atrelia had once been a place of beauty, and now it was reduced to rubble. He followed the pulse of his scanner through the ruins, stepping carefully over jagged debris. The signal led him to what remained of a grand hall, its roof long since collapsed. Sunlight filtered through broken beams, casting harsh lines across the rubble-strewn floor. Alan's scanner beeped insistently. He quickened his pace, weaving between shattered columns and twisted metal. The source of the signal came into view, a small figure pinned beneath a fallen beam. Alan's breath caught. She was humanoid, with pale blue skin so translucent it almost glowed. Wisps of silvery hair framed her delicate face, and her large, luminous eyes fluttered open as he approached. She couldn't have been more than 10 by human standards. The sight of her frail and half buried in debris made his heart clench. Gently, Alan knelt beside her, brushing away ash and grime. "Hey, easy now. You're safe," he murmured, though he doubted she understood his words. He activated the wrist-mounted translator, its interface crackling as it struggled to decipher her language. Snippets came through: "Help, danger, dying." "I've got you," Alan promised. The beam pinning her leg was heavy and twisted, but leaving her wasn't an option. He assessed the damage quickly. Moving it could worsen her injuries, but every second wasted risked more. Gritting his teeth, Alan braced himself and lifted. The metal groaned, resisting for a heart-stopping moment before shifting just enough. He pulled her free and wrapped his jacket around her trembling form. "It's all right," he said, feeling her shiver in his arms. "You're not alone anymore." Captain Solace's voice crackled through the calm, urgency sharpening the AI's tone. "Seismic activity is increasing. Recommend immediate evacuation." "Understood," Alan replied, his gaze never leaving the girl. He tightened his grip on her as the ground trembled beneath them. Cracks widened, belching steam and ash into the air. Alan moved quickly, shielding her from falling debris as he made his way back to the ship. The Solace loomed ahead, its hatch open and ready. They stumbled inside just as another tremor shook the world, and the hatch sealed behind them. Alan carried her to the medical bay, his mind racing. "Solace, what's her condition?" "Critical," the AI replied, mechanical arms whirring to life. "Multiple fractures, severe malnutrition, internal injuries. Immediate treatment required." Alan set her down gently, his movements precise despite the adrenaline pounding through him. He cleaned a deep gash on her leg, applying a regenerative salve designed to work on a variety of species. A nutrient injector followed, its contents specially formulated to stabilize vital signs. Through it all, her breathing remained shallow, but steady. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. Her gaze, unfocused and heavy with exhaustion, found his. Name, she whispered, the translator catching up with a delay. Alan, he said, offering a reassuring smile. I'm Alan. Ara, she murmured before slipping back into unconsciousness. Rest. Ara, Alan whispered, brushing a strand of silvery hair from her face. You're safe now. But was she? The ruins of Atrilia had nearly claimed her life, and the signal that had drawn him here felt less like a coincidence and more like the desperate act of a world with secrets yet to be revealed. Solace, Alan said, pacing as the ship rose through Atrilia's unstable atmosphere. I need a full translation of anything she said. Cross-reference with known languages, archives, anything. Understood, Captain. Initial results indicate a fractured dialect, Solace replied. Partial phrases decoded, hidden danger, last survivor, further analysis required. Alan's jaw clenched. Last survivor of what? Insufficient data, the AI said. Compiling possible scenarios. Alan turned to look at Ara, now resting on the medical cot. Her people had entrusted her with their last hope, whatever that was. He'd been drawn here for a reason, and whatever fate had wiped out Atrilia had unfinished business. The answer lay with the girl if he could protect her long enough to uncover it. He spent hours at Ara's side, monitoring her condition and piecing together what he could from fragmented translations. She awoke several times, each time with a flash of fear that slowly gave way to cautious trust. They spoke, her broken words hinting at horrors beyond comprehension, shadows that came with the dying star, devouring everything. Shadows, Alan pressed gently one evening, sitting beside her. What do you mean? Her eyes widened and her glow dimmed. Darkness hungry, consumes light. We hid but too late. Before Alan could ask more, alarms blared. Proximity alert, Solace warned. Energy signatures converging. On screen, Alan said, already moving toward the cockpit. Shapes emerged from Atrilia's atmosphere, amorphous, writhing darkness that pulsed as if alive. Alan's pulse quickened. The shadows Ara had spoken of were real, and they had followed her here. Hang on, Ara, he said, gripping the controls. This is going to be rough. The Solace's engines roared as it broke free from Atrilia's gravity well, leaving the fractured world and its dying light behind. Alan pushed the ship harder than he ever had before, weaving between plumes of ash and debris. Behind him, the shadows surged, twisting and warping through space with an unnatural grace. They were relentless, a living darkness that defied explanation. Solace, scan those things, Alan barked, eyes darting across the readouts. I need to know what we're dealing with. Scanning, Solace replied, though even the AI's composed tone held a hint of tension. Entities appear to be comprised of high-density energy fields with highly unstable flux patterns, no identifiable mass or origin. They exert localized gravitational distortions and appear resistant to standard matter-based defenses. In other words, they're trouble, Alan muttered, glancing back at Ara. She was curled in the co-pilot's chair, her pale blue skin flickering with weak light. Fear etched deep lines into her face as she stared at the writhing shapes on the display. Alan, she said, her voice trembling, they cannot be fought. They devour all light, all life. Then we don't fight them, Alan said, determination hardening his features. We outrun them. He gripped the controls and banked hard to starboard, narrowly avoiding a tendril of shadow that lashed out, striking where they'd been moments before. The darkness moved as if aware, like a predator scenting blood. Alan activated the ship's energy shields, but the flickering display warned that they were barely holding. They are drawn to what remains of my people's light, Ara whispered, staring at the shifting mass outside. It calls to them. So we need to make them lose interest, Alan said through gritted teeth. He toggled the controls for the ship's decoys, a pair of small drones designed to emit bursts of electromagnetic energy. They shot out from the rear of the Solace, glowing bright. For a breathless moment, the shadows paused, tendrils reaching out to envelop the decoys. It worked, Alan said, exhaling sharply. Relief was short-lived. The shadows consumed the decoys in seconds, turning their attention back to the Solace with renewed intensity. Captain, navigational pathways are unstable due to gravitational distortion, Solace reported. However, an emergency hyperspace jump may be possible with a calculated risk of spatial disintegration. Alan's hands flew over the controls, entering coordinates for a distant system far beyond Atrilia, and he hoped, beyond the shadow's reach. Calculate it, he ordered, and make it fast. Working, Solace said. Alanara cried out as the shadows closed in, their inky forms shifting and writhing with hunger. She clutched the armrest, her glow dimming further. They feed on what I carry. Not for long, Alan said, determination etched into every line of his face. Solace, how much longer? 10 seconds. The Solace dipped and twisted, Alan pushing it to the limits. Dark tendrils lashed out, grazing the ship with a pulse that sent sparks flying. Warning lights flared across the console, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning metal. Shields at 40%, Solace reported. Jump calculations complete. Do it. The space around them seemed to fold, stars stretching and bending as the Solace leapt forward, flinging itself into a tunnel of warped light. Alan's stomach lurched, and for a heartbeat, he felt as if he were being pulled apart. Then, with a deafening silence, they emerged into real space once more, light years from Atrilia. Alan slumped back, drenched in sweat. Status? Shields at 20%. Hull integrity stable. Pursuers absent, Solace replied. We appear to have evaded them. Alan exhaled, relief coursing through him like a wave. Era, he turned to find her slumped in the chair, her skin dim and her breathing shallow. He crossed the cockpit in 2 quick strides, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Hey, you're all right. We made it. Her eyes flickered open, searching his face. They will find us again, she whispered. They are bound to what remains of my people. As long as that spark exists, they will come. Then we'll find a way to break that bond, Alan said, his voice firm. I promise. She stared at him, doubt clouding her gaze. It cannot be broken. My people tried. We hid in chambers of light. We masked our presence, buried our essence. The shadows always found us. Alan's jaw tightened. Maybe they didn't have what we have now. We'll figure this out. Why, she asked, her voice small. Why risk so much? I am just one. No one's just one, Alan said, meeting her gaze. No one deserves to be left alone in the dark. She was silent for a long moment, then nodded. You are different. Yeah, Alan said with a faint smile. I get that a lot. The days that followed were a blur of planning and research. Alan dug into the Solace's archives, scanning for any reference to the entities they'd encountered. The shadows were an enigma unknown to most of the galaxy. Era spent hours meditating, focusing her energy to maintain the protective pulses that kept the bond from reigniting. Alan watched her closely, his worry deepening with each passing day. One night, as they sat in the dim glow of the ship's common area, Era spoke. There was a legend among my people, she said, her voice quiet, of a star that died and birthed the darkness. The shadows are remnants of that star-hungry echoes that seek what they lost. Hungry for light, Alan murmured. And your people's energy is tied to that star's remnants. Yes, she said, her eyes shimmering. It is a curse, and I am all that remains. Then we break the curse, Alan said, the words heavy with determination. There has to be a way to sever their connection to you. Ara shook her head. It would take more power than I have, more than any one being could hold. Alan leaned back, deep in thought. What about a star itself? If the shadows were born from a star's death, maybe a living star's energy could be enough to disrupt their bond. She hesitated, hope mingling with fear. It would be dangerous. So is doing nothing, Alan said. If there's a chance, we take it. They charted a course for the heart of Serava, a white dwarf star, known for its immense energy reserves. Ancient legends spoke of a lost civilization that had once harnessed its power. It was a place of mystery and danger, but it was their best hope. As the Solace approached the heart of Serava, the sensors blared warnings. The star's core emitted unpredictable energy pulses, warping space around it. Alan guided the ship through the storm, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is it," he said. "If we can channel the star's energy through you, it might be enough to sever the bond." Ara's eyes were wide, but she nodded. "I am ready." They prepared carefully, setting up an array of energy conductors and stabilizing crystals within the ship. Ara stepped into the chamber, her glow intensifying. "If I fail," she began, but Alan cut her off. "You won't. We're in this together." She closed her eyes and reached out, drawing on the star's energy. Light blazed around her, and for a moment the shadows appeared desperate and hungry. They surged toward the solace, but Alan and Ara focused, channeling every ounce of power into the bond that tied her to them. The darkness writhed, screeching as the connection frayed. Almost there, Alan shouted, feeling the heat and energy sear through him. With one final surge, the bond snapped. The shadows unraveled, their forms dissolving into nothingness. It was over. Alan caught Ara as she collapsed, her glow dim but steady. "Did we do it?" she whispered. "Yeah," Alan said, his voice raw. "It's over." Together, they drifted away from the heart of Serava, exhausted but free. They had faced the shadows and won, though the scars would remain. Their light burned brighter for it. Alan guided the Solace away from the turbulent space surrounding the heart of Serava, its engines humming quietly as the star's brilliant light faded behind them. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile thing, yet undeniably real. Beside him, Ara rested in the co-pilot's seat, her glow soft but steady. The severing of the bond had drained her to the core, yet she looked more at peace than he'd ever seen her. "Solace, status report," Alan said, leaning back and closing his eyes for a moment's reprieve. "Structural integrity," holding the AI responded, its calm tone a welcome reprieve from the chaos. "Energy reserves are at 50%. Minor damage sustained from gravitational distortions, but systems are stable." "Good enough," Alan murmured, the fatigue evident in his voice. He glanced over at Ara. "How are you feeling?" Her eyes opened slowly, the silvery irises catching the dim light. "Different," she said, as if tasting the word. "Lighter. The bonded is truly gone." "Yeah," Alan said with a smile. "It's gone." For a moment, neither spoke, letting the enormity of what they'd accomplished settle over them. But the quiet was short-lived. The comm crackled, and Solace's voice broke the silence. "Captain, incoming transmission. Signal strength weak, but identifiable as a distress call." Alan's eyes snapped open. Source: origin unknown. Fragmented data suggests remnants of the lost civilization that once inhabited this sector. Ara sat up straighter, her expression alert. "The ones who harness the heart's power." Possibly, Solace confirmed. Alan exchanged a glance with Ara. "You up for another mystery?" Her lips curved into a small smile, determination replacing weariness. "Always." The signal led them to a drifting wreck, a derelict station that orbited a dead planet, its exterior scorched and torn apart by time and cosmic forces. Alan maneuvered the Solace closer, peering at the broken structure. Glowing runes etched into its hull suggested advanced technology, far beyond anything he'd seen before. "Caution is advised," Solace warned. "Residual energy readings within the structure suggest instability." "Understood," Alan said, strapping on his gear. "Ara, you don't have to come." She stood beside him, her glow brightening. "This involves the past of my people. I will not hide." He nodded, impressed by her resolve. "All right then, let's do this." The airlock hissed as it connected with the derelict station. Alan led the way, blaster at the ready, his steps careful on the metal flooring, which groaned beneath their weight. Shadows danced in the dim light, casting eerie shapes along the walls. Ara walked silently behind him, her light casting a soft glow that pushed back the darkness. They passed through a corridor lined with shattered consoles and broken machinery. At the far end, a large chamber loomed, a control room with a central pedestal that pulsed faintly with energy. Alan approached cautiously, noting that the runes on the pedestal matched those on the station's exterior. "Ara," he prompted. She moved closer, placing her hand on the pedestal. The runes flared to life, and holographic projections filled the room scenes of a civilization in its prime, their crystalline towers gleaming beneath twin suns. Era watched, captivated and sorrowful. "It is them," she whispered. "The ancestors of my people." The projection shifted, showing the star that would become the heart of Sarava. It flared violently, and shadows emerged from its core, consuming everything in their path. The people fought back, harnessing the star's energy to build defenses. But the shadows were relentless. The final image showed a group of elders, their hands raised in a gesture of desperation, channeling their very essence into a small child. Era stumbled back, her breath catching. It was me. I am their last hope. Alan moved to her side, steadying her. They sacrificed themselves to protect you, to keep the light alive. But they failed, she said, pain evident in her voice. The shadows came anyway. They bought you time, Alan corrected gently. Time to find a real solution. And you did. Her eyes met his, filled with uncertainty. What now, Alan? What do I do with their sacrifice? Before he could respond, the station shuddered. Energy crackled through the walls, and the runes began to flicker erratically. Captain Solace's voice crackled through the calm, energy surge detected. The station is destabilizing. Of course it is, Alan muttered, grabbing Era's hand. Let's move. They raced through the corridors as the station trembled around them. Sparks flew, and sections of the ceiling collapsed. They reached the airlock just as a surge of energy erupted behind them, illuminating the station in a brilliant flash. Alan sealed the hatch, and the Solace pulled away, engines straining. From the viewport, they watched as the derelict station erupted, shards of energy scattering into space. For a moment it seemed as if the light would be snuffed out entirely. But then, slowly, it reformed a brilliant sphere of energy, hovering in the void. Solace, Alan prompted. The energy appears stable, the AI replied. Residual remnants of the lost civilization's essence coalesced into a new form. Ara's eyes widened. Their light lives on. Alan nodded. And so does yours. They drifted for a while, both lost in thought. Ara traced patterns in the air, her glow resonating with the light outside. They fought so hard, she said quietly. But they are gone. You carry their legacy, Alan said, his tone soft but insistent. It doesn't end here. She turned to him, determination blazing in her eyes. I want to learn, to make sure their sacrifice was not in vain, to protect others from the darkness. You will, Alan promised. I'll help. They charted a course for Heaven's Reach, a sanctuary Alan knew well. It was a place where those with no home could find one, where light could be nurtured even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. He explained it to Era as they traveled, and hope flickered in her eyes. The station came into view, a sprawling patchwork of ships, buildings and protective shields. It floated at the edge of known space, hidden from prying eyes. Alan guided the Solace to a docking bay, where they were met by Drev, a wiry man with a sharp smile and a sharper wit. New arrivals, Captain Drev asked, his eyes lingering on Era with curiosity. She's with me, Alan said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Her name is Era. Welcome, Era, Drev said, his tone softening. You're safe here. Ara nodded, but there was a spark of resolve in her gaze. Thank you. Over the next days, Ara found her place among the inhabitants of Heaven's Reach. She trained, learned, and grew stronger. Alan watched with pride and a touch of sadness, knowing his role would soon shift. He was a wanderer, after all, but he wouldn't leave until he was sure she was ready. One evening, as twin suns set beyond the station's shields, Era approached him on the observation deck. You're leaving. Yeah, Alan said, his voice tinged with regret. But you'll be all right. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Will you come back? As long as there are stars, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. You'll never be alone, Era. She hugged him tightly, a silent promise passing between them. When they parted, there was no need for more words. Alan boarded the Solace, engines flaring to life. He glanced back one last time, seeing Era standing tall, a beacon of light amid the darkness. "See you around, kid," he whispered as the ship leaped forward, leaving trails of starlight in its wake. The Solace soared away from heaven's reach, its engines leaving trails of light that faded into the vast expanse of space. Alan sat alone in the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the receding station. A part of him ached to stay. Era was more than just a mission, more than a burden he'd chosen to shoulder. She was a beacon, a reminder of why he kept going. But the stars called, as they always did. There were more like her out there, people in need, stories unfinished. Captain Solace's voice broke his reverie. "You appear reflective." "Don't start getting sentimental on me," Solace Allen replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's my job," noted the AI replied dryly. "However, I have detected several signals in nearby systems that may warrant investigation." "Show me," Allen said, leaning forward. He scanned the data: a merchant ship stranded near a black hole's event horizon, a mining colony under threat from an unknown anomaly, and a faint, repeating signal from an uncharted region of space. "Options, options," he murmured. "Set a course for the mining colony. Let's see if we can help." The stars blurred as the Solace jumped to light speed, leaving heaven's reach far behind. But Alan's mind lingered on the events that had brought him here: the shadows, the heart of Sereva, Ara's resolve. He wondered how she was faring, whether the peace they had earned would hold. He had to believe it would. Meanwhile, life at Heaven's Reach continued. Ara quickly became a fixture, her determination and light drawing both respect and curiosity from the station's inhabitants. She trained tirelessly, honing her control over her energy and learning from the diverse mix of beings who called the station home. There was Saren, a retired warrior with cybernetic limbs who taught her combat techniques; Nyla, a healer who guided her in meditation and focus; and Drev, who regaled her with stories of cunning escapes and narrow victories. But it wasn't just training. Ara found herself helping with repairs, sharing meals with newfound friends, and even laughing, a sound that surprised and warmed her each time it escaped. For the first time, she felt more than a survivor; she felt like she belonged. One day, while sparring with Saren in the training bay, Ara paused, breathing heavily. "How did you keep going?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "After losing so much." The older warrior regarded her with a mix of sympathy and steel. "You find something worth protecting," Saren said simply. "Something that makes the struggle matter." Ara nodded, the words settling deep within her. She thought of her people, their sacrifices, their hopes, and of Alan, who had risked everything to give her a chance. She would honor them by living, by protecting, by building something new. Weeks passed. Ara's skills grew, and so did her influence. She became a symbol of hope for others at Heaven's Reach, many of whom carried their own scars and burdens. When new arrivals came, frightened and unsure, Ara was often the first to greet them. She listened to their stories, offering quiet understanding and a promise that they were not alone. But the shadows that had once haunted her were not forgotten. Late one night, as Ara meditated alone, a flicker of darkness danced at the edge of her perception. Her eyes snapped open, fear gripping her heart. She focused, searching for the source, but it was gone, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. "Old fears die hard," Nyla said, stepping into the room. The healer's eyes were kind, but knowing. "I thought they were gone," Ara whispered, her voice small. "But sometimes I feel them." "Fear is not weakness," Nyla said gently, sitting beside her. "It is a reminder of what you have overcome and what you are capable of facing again, if you must." Ara closed her eyes, drawing strength from the words. She focused on the light within her, the essence of her people, their legacy. The shadows might always be a part of her story, but they no longer defined it. She was more than their last survivor. She was their future. One day, while helping to repair an aging freighter, Ara felt a sudden, familiar pulse in the back of her mind. She paused, her breath catching. It was faint, but unmistakable, a signature she had felt before. She raced to Drev's control room, her heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Drev asked, concern etching lines across his face. "A signal," Ara said, barely containing her urgency, "like the one that led Alan to me." Drev's eyes narrowed. "Could be a trap," Or worse. I have to know, Era insisted. Drev studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll gather a crew. No, Era said, determination blazing in her eyes. I need to do this myself. It wasn't long before Era stood in the cockpit of a small, fast vessel, a gift from Drev and the others. The ship's name, etched along its side, was simple but meaningful. Hope's Light. She took a deep breath and set a course for the signal's source, leaving Haven's Reach behind. The journey was fraught with challenges: hostile pirates, mechanical failures, treacherous gravitational fields, but Era pressed on. Each trial strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about finding answers, it was about facing whatever remnants of the darkness remained, on her own terms. When she finally reached the signal's source, her heart raced. It was an ancient outpost, long abandoned, orbiting a star on the brink of collapse. As she docked, memories of Atrilia flooded her: the ruins, the fear, the shadows. She shook them off. This time she was not helpless. Inside, the outpost was dark and silent. Ara moved carefully, her glow casting eerie reflections on metallic surfaces. The signal pulsed stronger, leading her to a central chamber. There she found a crystalline device, a relic of her people, its light dim and flickering. As she approached, shadows stirred at the edge of the room. Era's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. I am not afraid of you, she said, her voice steady. You have no power here. The shadows lunged, but this time Ara was ready. She channeled her light, focusing every ounce of her strength into a blinding pulse. The shadows recoiled, their forms unraveling. They were weaker now, echoes of what they had been. The relic flared to life, resonating with her energy. Ara placed her hand on it, and a flood of memories washed over her: her people's final moments, their desperate hope, and their message: you are not alone. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the truth. She was not the last. Fragments of her people's essence remained, scattered and hidden. The shadows had sought to consume them all, but their light endured. When Era returned to Haven's Reach, she was changed. She carried the relic with her, a symbol of hope and purpose. She shared her discovery with Alan, who arrived days later, his eyes bright with pride. Together, they vowed to seek out the remaining fragments, to rebuild what had been lost, and to protect the light from whatever darkness lay ahead. The Solace and Hope's Light drifted side by side in the vast expanse of space, their paths intertwined once more. Alan and Era stood together on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. There's a lot of work to do, Alan said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. We're ready, Era replied, her voice strong. And for the first time in a long while, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. They had faced the darkness and won, and as long as there was light worth protecting, they would continue to fight together.